Alright, welcome to the video, and this is going to be hopefully a short and sweet one about my version of the Lightning Sorcerer. So, as you can see, I am in an Infernal Horde. I've already completed the 9 waves, still got 2 lives remaining. So I'm going to go in, I'm going to show you how well this particular build works on the Fell Council. And then once I get done with the Fell Council, we will go into the build itself. So let's get this going. Apologies for the clacking of the keys that you're about to hear. It's the way I use them to do what it is I'm about to do. All right. Now this is a level 7 Infernal Horde. This is the only level that anybody really cares about with Infernal Hordes, simply because it's the first level of Infernal Hordes where you start earning Neth Iron based on the amount of ether that you gather. Now this particular run, I didn't gather a whole lot of ether. The choices just sucked straight up. So I couldn't build up my ether. There is a specific site you can go to that tells you which choices are the best choices to choose to build up your ether. I will put a link to that down below in the description area, as well as a link to the version of the build that I'm using, although I do have a slight modification to it. And we'll get into that here in a minute. As you can see, I've already destroyed 2 of the members of the Fell Council. And so now it's just this one last member who's just going to run around a lot and hide. But he will die. And he is almost dead. All right. Collect up our ether. And then here we just want to go to the spoils and materials. This, every time you hit it, you get 25 Neth Iron. As you can see, I was up over 300 on the Aether there, so it's going to be a few clicks here to get through this and build up the Neth Iron. And I could use a cash influx, so I may... Let's check. See where I'm at with Neth Iron. I got 630. All right. Yeah, we'll do one more here, and then we'll go for some cash. All right. So let's go back to town and let's get into the build. All right, so I'm just going to get into the build, get away from everybody here, and we'll go from there. So as you can see, I've got the Shaco, also known as the Harlequin Crest. I've got Tyrael's Might, and I'm wearing a Ring of Starless Skies. Now, the way I got these, I guess you could say it's kind of a cheat. I knew I wanted to do a Sorcerer this season. I just wasn't sure whether it was going to be the Triple Flame Incinerate, or if it was going to be Ball Lightning, or Chain Lightning, or Lightning Spear. So I started the Sorcerer, got him up to 100, completed the Mother's Gifts, and then stopped playing the character and started a whole new character, because as I was going through that process, I realized, oh, I can keep doing the Mother's Gifts over and over and over again just with a new character, and each time I could get a spark. So that's exactly what I did. I just kept starting new characters over and over and over again and built up my sparks by getting all the way through the Mother's Gifts. did that enough times that I was able to get the Tyrael's Might and the Ring of Starless Skies, and that's when I decided to stop the process of repeating character building just to get the spark. And I had enough sparks that I only really needed one more spark to complete everything. And I finally was able to then craft my Harlequin crest. Not that the Harlequin crest is needed for this build, but you definitely need the Tyrael's Might, and you definitely need a Ring of Starless Skies to start out with. You can swap the Ring of Starless and then go for the Harlequin, and that might be a really good thing just because of the cooldowns that you can get with the Harlequin. But you're going to need at least 2 of the 3. So what I did was, for the longest time, I wore this ring right here, the Band of Frozen Orbit, and then I was using a 2-handed staff. I recently changed that, and I went with a 1-handed weapon and a focus. Now, the reason why I did that was so that I could wear the Ring of Starless Skies. The Ring of Starless Skies, it's just amazing. It gives you increased damage to begin with. You know, as you can see, spending your primary resource reduces the resource cost of your skills and increases your damage by 10% multiplicative for 3 seconds up to 50 times, right? 50% multiplicative. So huge amounts of damage, increased attack speed, increased critical strike chance, right? You get the resistance to all the elements, plus you get a +4 to core skills. And because we're going to be doing a Lightning Spear build, that's a core skill, so this gives us a +4 to that, right? So this build is based on the Maxroll build. The only things that I have changed out is A, I'm using the Ring of Starless Skies instead of a Ring of Frozen Orbit, and B, I'm using Temerity instead of Tybalt's Will. Now, most people will go with Tybalt's Will. I prefer Temerity, A, because of the damage reduction that you get for 1, and B, for the number 2, you always keep a barrier up. And the barrier is important. It's very important. Because with a barrier up, as you can see here, I'm dealing 30 times or 30% multiplicative damage to vulnerable enemies while I have a barrier. So I use Temerity to keep the barrier up, and then every time my Lightning Spears and my little Ice Blades trigger vulnerability on somebody, I get that 30% multiplicative damage, right? So that's why I'm using Temerity instead of Tybalt's Will. Now, I'm using Focus and a single-handed weapon so that I can give up the Band of Frozen Orbit in place of the Starless Skies. And then I'm putting my Frozen Orbit on my Focus. And of course, I'm using the Splintering Energy on my 1-handed weapon. This allows me to get the benefit of these 3 and the Starless Skies. If I put the 2-handed weapon on, I get the benefit of the Splintering Energy and the Band of Frozen Orbit, but because I'm wearing Tyrael's Might and the Harlequin Crest, then I got to give up the vulnerable damage increase with a barrier. And I didn't really want to do that. So that's the basic changes that I've made. Everything else here is the same as Maxroll's build. They recommend that you wear Isu's Heirloom here. You need your Tal Rasha, of course, you know, and then your Tyrael's Might in either Harlequin Crest or Starless Skies, just depending on what you can craft. We're a little late in the season here with only 2 weeks to go as the time I'm making this video, so I don't know if anybody watching this is going to be able to replicate this build within that 2-week period by doing what I did. It definitely was a better thing to start at the beginning of the season. But then again, who knows? You may already have some of this equipment during the season, and you can slap this together really, really quickly. The biggest and most important piece to this whole build is, of course, the Fractured Winter Glass here. Now, as you can see, mine is not the greatest. I only have a 49% chance to spawn a random conjuration when my Frozen Orb explodes, and my conjurations only have a 68% chance to launch a Frozen Orb at nearby enemies. So it would be much better if I had the 65 and a 90% version there. And that would definitely help this build a great deal, but Exquisite Blood just isn't dropping anymore like it used to. So I'm having a difficult time being able to farm Lord Zir and try to find a better Fractured Winter Glass. If you can get a really good Fractured Winter Glass, regardless of the character, hold on to it. You slap this over to Eternal when the season ends, maybe just build one on Eternal. But the Fractured Winter Glass is the most important piece to this whole build, because every time you cast a Frozen Orb and that Frozen Orb explodes, it reduces the cooldown on your Lightning Spear so that you can then cast Lightning Spear. So the more Frozen Orbs and the faster you can get those Frozen Orbs out, the better, because then you can get that Lightning Spear going. Eventually, if you get a good enough setup, you can cast just 1 or 2 Frozen Orbs. They bring out the conjurations that then start casting Frozen Orbs. In the meantime, those Frozen Orbs from your conjurations are affecting your cooldown for your Lightning Spear and any other conjuration. And you can just start casting constant Lightning Spears over and over and over again, periodically having to hit your Frozen Orb. And at that point, as you saw when I beat the Fell Council, there's just a bunch of Lightning Spears going everywhere, doing massive, massive amounts of damage. So the things I tried to go for here pretty much match what's on Maxroll, right? We want to go for critical strike damage and Lightning Spear lucky hit chance on my gloves. For my weapon, critical strike damage again, and then a chance for a second Lightning Spear to cast when I cast Lightning Spear. And then on focus, same thing, right? Trying to get a chance for second Lightning Spear to cast. But then rather than going with critical strike damage on the focus, I added Lightning Spear damage, and I got a pretty lucky roll there, I think, just to increase the Lightning Spear damage itself. And that's pretty much because I already have a really high critical strike damage, and then the critical strike chance on this particular build is up there quite a bit. So as you can see, I'm pushing 895% on the critical strike damage with a 72% chance of critical strike chance. So that's a lot of damage. And it just crushes. Prior to adding the Harlequin Crest, I was able to beat Uber Lilith with this build. It did take about 50 attempts, I will admit that. Phase 1 on her, very, very simple. But phase 2, where she starts cutting the platforms down into a smaller triangle, it becomes a little bit of a pain, because you gotta get a proper pattern to run around and avoid things with, while she goes through her little animations that you just can't avoid. You have to wait your time through them before you can finally kill her. But once I killed her, then I got my free spark there, and was able to go ahead and get my Harlequin Crest going, which was pretty sweet. So let's get into, real quick, not that we need to, let's go ahead and get into the Paragons and skill tree. Again, the skill tree here, it's pretty much the same as Maxroll. I didn't really change a whole lot. I may take some points and put some points into Frozen Orb, just so that I can get the vulnerability to kick. But in doing that, that means I'm going to take away from my ultimate of Unstable Currents, which is fine. Because I honestly, you know what? I really don't use unstable currents that often. I just don't. So I'm going to put that into... Yeah. We're going to put it up here into Frozen Orb. We want to go for the vulnerability. So there we go. But outside of that, everything is pretty much a max roll match. Right? So I'll put a link again to the Maxroll build, and I recommend using that build to get yourself going. The Paragon board is pretty much identical to Maxroll. I may have readjusted a couple of things just to increase damage at one point somewhere. You know, because you got things like here, every 5 intelligence within range gives your conjuration skills gained 15% increased damage, right? So I may have done something like that here and there, but for the most part, this is a one-for-one match to Maxroll. And it's been working great. It's great. I'm not using reinforced, not using controlled. I was using enchanter for a little bit, but then I removed enchanter. I may put enchanter back on there to get the increased non-physical damage, but if I do that, that is going to go up here in place of conjurer. It's nice to have the conjuration skills last about 20% longer, but with as many conjurations as you're putting out due to your frozen orb explosions from the fractured winter glass, and then how quickly you can cast them, it's a viable trade-off, I think, between the conjurer glyph and the enchanter glyph. Just to show you what the difference is on how that works, if we go and look at our stats here, you will see that our damage with fire, lightning, cold, and everything, they're all sitting around 462. So if I switch that one little glyph out, and then we go back to our stats, now these have all bumped up to 541. So enchanter works great if you have a good mix of fire and poison and cold and lightning going on. And then that, of course, you know, just gets buffed by the Tal Rasha ring. But the only way to really get all that going on is instead of using the Harlequin Crest, I suggest you use Andariel's Visage. Andariel's Visage will give you a Poison Nova explosion periodically, and then when you're running around hitting them with your lightning plus the cold from your frozen orb, which when it explodes also causes a Hydra to show up or another lightning spear to show up, or the ice blades to show up, which of course are applying cold, then you get a good mix of your fire, cold, lightning, and poison from that Andariel Visage poison. And then you can just go massive damage that way. I have seen a build that uses Andariel's Visage instead of the Harlequin Crest, and it was pretty cool. I'm having second thoughts about whether or not I should have gone with the Harlequin Crest, but over on the Eternal side, I have enough sparks built up that I may do an Andariel's Visage, and then once the season ends and this character moves over to Eternal, I may swap the two out and just see where it goes from there. But that's the build. That's my version of the build. I recommend if you're not playing a sorcerer, go ahead and play a sorcerer this season. Try to get it done within the next 2 weeks if possible, and go for the Lightning Spear build based on Maxroll. Again, my changes: I use Temerity in place of Tybalt's Will in order to keep a barrier up at all times, because anything that heals you, anything at all that heals you, gives you a barrier. And with this particular pair, I get 100% of whatever my maximum life is. And you'll see there's some things that I have healing going on. I want to say there was some things that was like plus 41 life on hit, right, on this weapon. So every time I hit something with a lightning spear, I'm getting 41, right? So that keeps me healed up. That keeps my barrier up at all times. And I'm able to get that buff going there for that. But for the most part, you could either use Temerity and or Tibalt's Will. I do have a pair of Tibalt's Will. They're not the greatest Tibalt's Will. They're only 18 times increased when you're unstoppable. But you have to be able to become unstoppable, which means in order to be unstoppable, you have to take off the mythic helm, and you have to put on a helm that is using Snow Veiled. That way there, when you cast an ice armor, you become unstoppable for 5 seconds, and then that will trigger the Tibalt's Will. So if you have a Tibalt's Will, but you don't have enough for a mythic helm, then get you a really good regular helm, put Snow Veiled on it, and use the Snow Veiled in combination with the Tibalt's Will, and you'll still be really, really good. Me personally, I just like the Temerity setup. It works really, really well, you know, and it's what does it for me to allow me to have the Storm Swell on my gloves while having the Splintering Energy on my one-handed weapon and the Frozen Orb on a two-hand or a focus, so that I can throw the Starless Skies in there and get that damage buff from Starless Skies. So, hope you enjoyed seeing my build. Again, the links to the Maxroll build are down below. Check them out, and I hope you enjoy having a good time playing the rest of Season 5, and look forward to seeing everybody in Season 6 with the new expansion, which I am looking greatly forward to. Enjoy.